What's going on, everybody? This is Clydean Fair. Let's talk about Wartales Brute Build Edition. I've been making a few different videos for the different class types, and normally I start off with getting into stat builds and explaining all the stats and whatnot. I really need to just make a statistics video for attribute points, so that's going to be elsewhere, and I'm just going to do a quick gloss over. Brutes are a strength-based class or role and primarily get their damage off of strength. You could put a ton of points into strength, but you should most likely prioritize either movement, critical, or willpower. Generally movement and willpower, unless you're trying to make a more DPS oriented brute. That gloss over aside, let's go ahead and dig into specializations. I'm just going to go whoop-ah and put the specializations up on the screen. So here's a giant list of them, but I'm only going to leave these up here for a little bit. Let's start describing what our first build is. Now, this first build is primarily going to be an AoE DPS, kind of just a big bruiser build. And in order for us to achieve this, we are going to start off with the Smasher subclass, which is a medium armor subclass. So this is definitely more of a bruiser role, but it does give you an AoE attack that not only poisons enemies, but if you hit more than 2 people, it creates poison clouds, which is a debuff, which will lead into other specialization selections that we've got later on down this list. Next up, Valor's Chain. So we're able to generate Valor points by hitting multiple units just using our bonus attack, which we get from Smasher. Next up, we're going to grab Cruelty. Now, what Cruelty does is it essentially increases damage and critical hit chance by 20%. So not only does it increase your critical hit chance by 20%, but it gives you a flat 20% damage buff against any unit that has a debuff on it. Not to mention, Cruelty also reduces incoming damage from debuffed enemies by 20% when it's fully upgraded. After Cruelty, we're going to go ahead and give them one-on-one. Arguably, this one can be replaced, but I have it set up just to where once you take care of all of the riffraff and get other units to help engage, you should be taking reduced damage from the one enemy that you have tied up in engagement. That was the main reason I grabbed that. Lastly, we're going to be grabbing Intervention. I'm honestly not a huge fan of the different abilities at level 10 for brutes, but I wanted to make sure that we actually had something that had a little bit more utility on it instead of just a DPS role. So this one would feel more of a bruiser. It can peel, it can deal damage, it's got AoE attacks, but it's kind of a hybrid build. Anyway, moving on from the first build, we're going to look into our second build. Our second build is exactly what I would call a traditional tank. You start off by grabbing Destroyer, which gives you Weakening Blow and Heavy Armor. So not only do you have the bonus constitution and lowered strength that heavy armor classes give you, but you also apply weakening with your new attack. Next up, we're going to grab Valorous Duel. So whenever you engage in an enemy, you generate a Valor point. So you'll be able to smack someone upside the face with your mace or hammer, whatever you want to call it, and then generate a Valor point and then hit them upside the head again with Weakening Blow. After that, we're actually going to be grabbing Armor Breaker. So the main role of this tank is to, quite frankly, just soften up enemy units by reducing their armor. So Armor Breaker is great for this. It actually increases damage dealt to armor by 35%. Our next option that we're going to be taking is going to be Temperance. Now, Temperance is arguably a good skill for a tank and also arguably just not with the current Wartales meta. I'm not going to elaborate on that too much, but it's not bad. If you take 2 hits, you automatically generate Deflection. So Deflection reduces incoming damage by 70%. So as long as you're able to actively attack units and do your job as a tank, reducing incoming damage in future rounds is always a benefit. And finally, I grabbed a Defensive Riposte. So basically, anytime you disengage an enemy unit, it gives you a chance to attack with an attack of opportunity at 50%. Essentially, with Defensive Riposte, we are going to make it to where whenever we disengage a unit, there's a 50% chance that instead of us taking an attack of opportunity, we actually get to deal an attack of opportunity. I grabbed it just because as a tank, there's not really that many times where you need to disengage, but sometimes you need to peel for people, and this is exactly what you need to help mitigate some of that attack of opportunity damage, especially when you combine it with Deflection. Just as a side side note, once you upgrade Armor Breaker, whenever you destroy a unit's armor completely, you will actually get Inspiration, which doubles your movement, as well as the Brutality buff, which increases damage by 30%. And as for Temperance, whenever you upgrade that, you will not only gain Deflection, but you will also gain Riposte whenever you take 2 attacks. Moving on from our second build, we are going to dig into our third build. Our third build will be starting off with Vanguard, which gives you a dash move that applies slowdown and minor damage to all enemy units that are in the path that you move. Essentially, it is kind of the same as the dash mechanic for some of the great swords in the game. What will happen is you will disengage the enemy that you are currently engaged in, dash through a few different units, you apply damage and slowdown to all of them, and then you end up in a new spot. Unfortunately, with Vanguard, this is a medium armor build, so you are going to be a little bit squishier than what a tank would be, but the added movement is pretty helpful in my opinion, and it will make you into a pretty nice situational bruiser. Next up, this one's arguable. You could go with Valorous Chain and generate a Valor point by using your dash ability. I opted to grab Valorous Duel, which every time you engage with somebody, you generate a Valor point. The reason being is because since I'm able to engage with a basic attack and then dash away and disengage, it essentially gives me free opportunities to attack and leave the engagement. Now, that doesn't sound that great until we also grab Defensive Riposte later on. And Defensive Riposte, whenever you disengage an enemy, you gain a 50% chance to attack with an attack of opportunity. So that will proc on this disengage for your dash. Next up, we're also going to be grabbing Armor Breaker, which we've already covered in the second one. Essentially, you deal 35% more damage to any armor that a unit has. If you break the armor, you also gain Brutality as well as Inspiration, which doubles your movement and gives you a 30% damage buff upon upgrade. So that's pretty solid, especially since you're going to be moving around and smacking people upside the head with one-handed or two-handed hammers or maces. Finally, with this one, we really want to be damaging as much armor as we can. So we're grabbing Guard Breaker. Guard Breaker helps you ignore all guard when upgraded. All of the attacks from this unit will ignore 100% of guard and will simply just do a ton of damage to armor and make it to where your other units are able to easily damage them as well. Anyway, guys, that pretty much sums up 3 different types of builds that you could look into. They are definitely not min-maxed or meant to be the best builds, but they give you a couple of different ideas on how you may want to build your brutes if you find yourself not knowing what direction to go with your hammer boys. Anyway, guys, that's all I've got for this video. If you'd like to see more content such as this, like the video, drop a comment, make that number go up, and I hope to see you all in my comment section or live stream chat soon. Until next time, have a good one.